Thank you for that. My goodness. I'm going to try to hit that. Hearts to wonder, open our hearts to this message that you would have for us. Amen. Where are all of my superhero lovers, comic book lovers, movie, anybody? Okay, that's a decent amount. For folks who is worshiping online, Jordan and Chrissy, thank you. I know it's probably because you wanted to hear me preach on this movie. I want everybody who's who's listening online to comment real quick who your who your favorite superhero is in the comment section. Everyone else here, just shout out real quick who your favorite superhero is. Okay. I have a good, decent variety there, if you could hear that at all. I think if I were to choose who my favorite superhero is, I would probably have to say God. Um, Such a good Christian. I don't know who else I could choose other than that. Well, we've been in this series called Hope at the Movies, and this is actually the very last sermon, Hope at the Movies. And movies give us different aspects of a reality, right? Like movies can unify us, movies can inspire us. We've actually seen different things like that with the movies that we looked at, whether it's the love or it's the desire for love and acceptance that we found in Love, Simon and The Shape of Water, or the importance of following your passions that we heard from Haley when she preached on the movie Coco. But movies connect us to something deeper down inside of us, don't they? Sometimes they force us to examine ourselves, kind of how we live, and maybe rethink our identity. And the movie that we're looking at today does just that. It makes us reflect on ourselves, on our society, and on our culture. If you don't know what movie we're looking at today, it's Black Panther. And I'm very, very excited. I love this movie so much. There are so many different themes in this movie of Black Panther. It could be its own 3 to 4 week series. I mean, you could really mull over this movie and see all kinds of different things within it. So I'm actually going to be talking about the movie Black Panther all the way throughout, and hopefully we'll connect with the theological implications of this movie, especially if you haven't seen it. If you haven't seen the movie, please go watch the movie after service or something tonight. I know that not everyone loves superhero movies and things like that, and that's okay. Not everybody's perfect, but this movie is more than just a superhero movie about a guy with special powers and a special suit. But like I said earlier, it kind of forces us to observe who we are, the things that are deep down inside of us. And like I tell, Jenny announced me as a campus minister, like I tell my college students at Merge, once you make an observation, then you have an obligation. And that's kind of a dangerous way to live when we observe things that are within ourselves. So, before we actually look at the trailer, I want to give you some background about the creation of Black Panther and about the movie that will hopefully shed some contextual light on this sermon. So the creation of Black Panther, this character happened in 1966, okay? Let's stop right there, 1966. The emergence of a black superhero in 1966 is against the backdrop of the civil rights and black power movement. So there was this activist, you hopefully have heard of him, Stokely Carmichael. And after about a year after of the assassination of Malcolm X and the Watts riot in L.A., Stokely Carmichael comes in and takes over the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee from a guy named John Lewis. John Lewis was a pacifist. Stokely Carmichael was not a pacifist. He started changing their philosophy, their pacifist mentality, and he escalated their militancy within this group to kind of have more of a black ownership, a black business ownership, a community of black folks taking care of one another, and kind of wanted to have this self-defense. Because black people were being assaulted time and time again. In 1966, June 16th of 1966, Stokely Carmichael actually stood before a group of passionate people, and he said this. He said, "The only way we're going to stop the white man from whooping us is to take over. We've been saying freedom for 6 years, and we ain't got nothing. What we're going to start saying now is black power." So it's very important for us to remember that today about the idea of taking over as a person of color from the white community with this sermon. Now, at the same time, in Oakland, California, around this time, Dr. Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale co-founded the Black Panther Party for self-defense. A lot of times when you think of the Black Panther Party, you think of people of color, women and men, wearing leather, walking around with shotguns. That is a part of their history because of the self-defense that they had to give to one another in these communities. But they had high political regards for housing, better jobs, better education for people of color. Now, these were people who were either from families or like first-generation folks who moved from the South because lynching after lynching and atrocious acts of violence over thousands of people had suffered this kind of violence. And so these people of color moved to California seeking equality, but they were met with police brutality. They were met with exclusivism. So this is the backdrop of the Black Panther character emerging into our society. We actually have a pic of Dr. Newton sitting in a chair. Go ahead and throw that up if you don't mind. That first pic of Huey P. Newton. There we go. So you actually see Dr. Newton in this iconic peacock chair. In one fist, you see a rifle, and then another fist, you see a spear. He's sitting on a zebra rug with traditional masks and shields around. This is imagery of an African warrior sitting on a throne. This right here is a picture of black power and royalty. Now, when the movie of Black Panther came out or started to be talked about, there was a poster that was released of King T'Challa. He is the main figure sitting in a chair. And if you go ahead and throw that picture up next. And so this was the poster. This is one of the original advertisements. When people made the connection, I remember the day I saw on Instagram all over the place, when people made the connection between Dr. Newton and King T'Challa sitting in their thrones, Fox News lost their minds. It was incredible. It was a beautiful day of white tears everywhere. It was so lovely. They just didn't know what to do with themselves, and we'll talk kind of more about that, but it was such a beautiful day in my life. Back to the 60s, a black superhero marked a racial transformation in the 60s on political and social levels. This was a cultural phenomenon for people of color. For people with white faces, we have always had heroic representation in the media and other public arenas. Most of culture reflects us and the infinite versions of us, doesn't it? It's no shock to turn on a TV and see every person in the White House be white, every person in government. Grab a comic book. The superheroes are mostly all white. There's no shock to watch a movie of a white woman or man play the white savior figure to a group of impoverished black teens. So we've seen this time and time again, and unfortunately we've grown up with a Jesus figure who looks strikingly similar to me with way better hair. So, I mean, we see Jesus as a white figure, and that blows my mind for the thought of Jesus being a Middle Eastern man. But finally, you have this black figure coming out in this tumultuous time of change, and he's not just a black superhero, he is a king. King T'Challa. If you want to go ahead and throw up that other picture, this is King T'Challa. He is king over an African country named Wakanda. He was prince. His father was named King T'Chaka. King T'Chaka was murdered, so Prince T'Challa became King T'Challa. Wakanda is an African country that's richer and more technologically advanced than any other country in the world because of a precious metal that lies beneath its surface called vibranium. Now, vibranium is a secret to the rest of the world. Most of the world believes that Wakanda is a third world country and is very poor, which is brilliant because it's actually protected them from colonization of white people. So, what Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, the creators of Black Panther in the 60s, what they're doing is they are celebrating Africa as the world's leader in wealth, resources, and technology, instead of this Eurocentric misconception of Africa as and I quote, a shithole country, if you will. So you have Africa as like the world's leading people. Now, when this movie came out, there was a lot of hype behind it. And actually, I'm going to back up for a second. I want to tell a story of in 1976. So all this was happening when the celebration of Africa, and this was in the 60s. So pretty kind of progressive by the authors of this comic book. But in 1976, this is one of my favorite stories. A man named Don McGregor was writing the Black Panther comic, and he was encouraged by the powers that be to include more white figures in his comic. So he did just that. And in the next issue of the Black Panther, he actually had the Black Panther beat up a whole smudge of Klan members. Yes, so the white figures that was included in this were all Klan members. You want me to add more whiteys? I'm going to do it. And they're all going down. It's all going to be Klan members. And so that's my favorite story of Black Panther. But so this movie had a lot of hype. You know, the history behind it, and the 60s and 70s, and the progressiveness of Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. Until now, you have this hype of this movie. And at its essence, Black Panther, the movie, is a celebration of black culture. It is a celebration of people of color who have created this masterpiece, because Hollywood, as we know, is dominated by white men, directors, editors, producers, and all of a sudden this piece of beautiful art comes out by people of color and has made over $1 billion. And I believe we as the church need to celebrate that, because if you watch this movie and you're a white person, you're not going to see a whole lot of representation of yourselves. Which is exactly the reason you need to watch this movie, because it's almost an entirely black cast. Now, when the movie was coming out in February, a bunch of white-dominated media outlets started saying things like, well, what if we made a movie called White Panther with an all-white cast? Would that be unfair? And my first thought was, who are you? Open your eyes. You're in your 40s and 50s asking this question. Aren't you the same ones who grew up watching Andy Griffith and Leave It to Beaver? Like, do you not know that blockbuster hits like Lord of the Rings and Braveheart and The Passion of the Christ are all white cast? Are you kidding me? This is a celebration of people of color, because when I used to watch movies that had an all people of color cast, it was usually like Boys in the Hood, Menace to Society, and so a lot of times when black folks are depicted in movies, they're depicted as thugs and gangsters. Or oftentimes you'll see black folks depicted as slaves or servants or victims. Not in this movie. This is a movie about black achievement, not necessarily black suffering. So we celebrate that as the church. Especially a white church. We need to celebrate something like that. And so you have people in this movie. Her name's Shuri. You can actually go ahead and throw a picture of Shuri. This is King T'Challa's sister, and this is a reason we need to celebrate. You actually have, I don't know if you say, is it loading? Or is it? Okay, great. It'll come up. Yeah, this is Shuri. This is King T'Challa's sister. She's a 16-year-old black woman who runs the whole operation. She's the brains of the whole operation. So if you like comic books and you know Tony Stark and how brilliant this man is, he doesn't touch the advancements that this woman has provided for Wakanda. So we celebrate, so this gives an image of a young black woman for other young black women to look up to. And every king has bodyguards, right? King T'Challa's bodyguards in this movie are all the most skilled, fiercest, badass women that you ever see. They're all women. So everything in this movie is very Afrocentric. It's from the dress, from the language, from the jewelry, from the dance, the tribal dances. Everything is showing the heritage and the deep roots of Africa. Now, there's one more person I want to highlight before we watch the trailer, and this is this is Michael B. Jordan. He plays the antagonist, Eric Stevens. His name is Killmonger. Now, Killmonger is of Wakandan descent, but he and King T'Challa are their cousins. Their fathers were brothers. The previous king, King T'Chaka, kills his father. And they have an opportunity to bring him as a young boy back to Wakanda to raise him. And King T'Chaka decides to abandon him. So Michael B. Jordan, Eric Stevens, I'm all over the place. I'll just call him Killmonger. Killmonger grows up as a young black male in Oakland with no family. And we actually need to, this is essential to the dialogue in the movie to kind of realize the black experience as this boy growing up. So go ahead and play the trailer.
I have seen gods fly. I've seen men build weapons that I couldn't even imagine. I've seen aliens drop from the sky.
Yeah.
But I have never seen anything like this. How much more are you hiding?
Hold up. Let's go.
We are home. My son, it is your time.
Show me my respect and bow down.
You get to decide what kind of king you are going to be. Don't freeze.
I never freeze.
The revolution will not be televised.
Show me my respect and bow down. We own ya. We own ya. We only getting started now. Cause we own ya. Everybody think they know me now. Cause we own ya. You and I'm a homie now. Cause we own ya.
I waited my entire life for this. The world's gonna start over. I'ma burn it all.
What happens now determines what happens to the rest of the world.
You will not be able to stay home, brother. You will not be able to plug in, turn on, and cop out. The revolution will not be televised.
Let's have some fun.
The revolution will be live.
That was exciting. So you know the background of the character, the Black Panther character, and a couple of the main characters in the movie. What's the struggle? You know, what's the conflict in this movie? The trailer really doesn't show the conflict in this movie. Like I mentioned earlier, there are so many different topics and themes that we could talk about socially wise with this film, but the main thing that it addresses is systemic racism. The offshoots of systemic racism are oppression, refugees, colonialism, immigration, resources. But it all begins with systemic racism. Remember, Wakanda is a place of immense wealth and resources. The kind of resources that you feel, the way you live, is that they'll never run out. That kind of place. The people of Wakanda has long enjoyed a history of prosperity. However, it's been to the detriment of other people around the world. So you actually see, as a viewer of this film, multiple times where Wakandans turn their back on the needs of the rest of the world. Its people has enjoyed such prosperity that it's kind of made them petty, fearful leaders. And so instead of putting the rest of the world in front of them, they actually take their country and they put their comfort levels on top of everyone else. I wish there was an example of a country that I could use for this. But it makes us think of ourselves, right? It makes us think of America when we see all these things happen. Wealth and prosperity, resources that seem like they're never going to run out, petty, fearful leaders who are so scared to actually put others in front of themselves. Actually, King T'Challa and his ex-girlfriend / love of his life, Nakia, they're actually having a conversation in the marketplace of Wakanda, and there's this dialogue that's happening between the two of them about using the resources to help the rest of the world. And Nakia basically says that we have all these immediate resources at our disposal. We can save so many lives. This isn't just a dialogue about foreign aid. This is a dialogue about what it means to be human. This is a dialogue about what necessities we need to survive. What resources we have to actually give to other people to make sure that they live basic human lives. And so this conversation's happening between Nakia and King T'Challa, and King T'Challa is actually very nervous about using their resources to help the rest of the world, because remember, the rest of the world believes that they're a third world country. They don't know about the wealth and prosperity they have. So once you start helping others with the resources you have, the secret's gone. And Nakia is saying what we can do is we can welcome refugees into our home and we can assist them. And this is the line that King T'Challa actually says. He says, if you let the refugees in, this place will be just like everywhere else. Again, if there was only a country that we could look at. But we have these conversations already, right? Like, we talk about immigration and refugees here. We have those conversations at work and at the bar and when we're talking with our friends. We're talking about these sorts of things all the time. On one hand, you can see the virtue of Wakanda staying a secret utopia because their people have prospered. They're living great lives, and they've not been succumbed to colonialism from white folks. But on the other side of the coin, you actually have this idea how equally intriguing it would be that the use of resources could change so many lives and transform so many people's lives in their society. So this dialogue back and forth about the resources and the use of these resources is kind of a question about stewardship, isn't it? It's a question about the things that you've been given. So for many have been given all of these resources to use, and they use them for influence and power and wealth and sometimes, unfortunately, dominance. And then for the masses, they or we are subject to the way other people use their resources. In this case, you have resources that you can use no matter what it is. We all have been given resources that we can use no matter what it is, which raises two questions for me. The first one's kind of trite. It's kind of a silly question. Who says that the things that we own are just ours? When did life become, this is my thing, I bought this thing, this is your thing, you bought that, and if you need my thing, if I trust you and I know you, you can use it, but I'm going to need it back. When did life become about possession and holding on to things so much so that you're not able to live your life like this? Who cares? You will never, ever regret being generous. But when did life become about, this is mine? Two, we actually think about our actions, right? We think about how our actions affect other people. But do we ever sit and wonder how our inaction impacts the lives of others? I know it's kind of difficult to possibly conceptualize this, but do we sit and think about how what are the long-term and the short-term effects of how we're not living our lives? Do we think about how it impacts other people's lives, how we're not using our resources? See, over and over in this film, if you watch it, you'll see that Wakanda is complicit with the suffering of others. You see that because of Wakanda's complicitness in not sharing their resources, they have caused suffering and hurting. Killmonger's father, while he was in America, he was radicalized by the hurt of America and the lack of response from his homeland. Radicalization to him happened because he knew there were people who had resources but wouldn't use them because of their selfishness. He actually says this to the former king T'Chaka. He said, "The communities are hurting, flooded with drugs, overly policed and incarcerated. All over the planet, our people don't have the resources to get ahead." A little while later in the movie, his son, Killmonger, says, he kind of echoes his father's sentiment, and he says, about 2 million people look like us. And Wakanda has the tools to liberate them all. So Killmonger wants to use Wakanda's resources to free people of color across the world from white oppression. Which, remember, Stokely Carmichael, this idea of we need power to free ourselves. So when I see that, when I watch this movie, the barrier that's set up at the very beginning of the movie between the protagonist and antagonist, it quickly fades for me. This barrier is diminished as we see into the heart of what people of color are actually dealing with in their lives. Eventually, King T'Challa actually says to his father, Killmonger, because of the way that we've not come to the rescue, because of the way we've not used our pool of resources, he is a monster in our own making. Sure, these two parties have this insatiable hatred towards colonial oppression, but at the same time, there's a clash of ideologies towards how they see the world, from those who have suffered and how they see the world, from those who have been privileged and how they see the world. So as I walked out of this movie, I got in the car, Roxy and I were driving away, and it was kind of quiet in the car, and Roxy says, "What are you thinking?" And I remember saying something along the lines that as a person who didn't grow up with much, my white privilege, or if we want to call it what it is, my part in systemic racism, has provided me opportunity to succeed despite not coming from an affluent neighborhood or family. So when I see this through a white lens, this movie, I can kind of see it poor versus rich, socialism versus capitalism, all the things that maybe sometimes you have the middle class white lens seeing through all this. But for black viewers, the questions that ring true are, wouldn't it be nice to live in a world that we're not encumbered by systemic racism and oppression, and that we're masters of our own identity and destiny? What if we actually lived in a world where we could galvanize resources in a community and have political power in order to kind of reverse the effects of systemic racism? These right here, these are questions of liberation. These are people asking questions about freedom for themselves and for their community. Dr. James Cone, a liberation theologian he went to Garrett, where most of everyone here is gone, believes that Moses preached liberation to the Israelites in Egypt. He says that gives a powerful message that could be applied to our society here, and he actually compares the empire of Egypt to that of America, saying that God's most concern is for those who are oppressed in America. And he says this, and we can go ahead and throw up that slide. In the Exodus event, God is revealed by means of acts on behalf of a weak and defenseless people. This is the God of power and of strength, able to destroy the enslaving power of the mighty Pharaoh. So in this understanding of God, you have this mighty God, the defender of the defenseless, the person who holds all the power in order to come and free God's people. But God doesn't just stay this strong man. God also reacts to the people by suffering with them. God becomes weak. And Dr. Cone says this, in Christ, God enters human affairs and takes sides with the oppressed. Their suffering becomes God's, their despair, divine despair. So Killmonger in this movie wants to liberate his people through the Force, through strongholds, being the mighty figure. But eventually, King T'Challa comes to this understanding that a true liberator must become strong and must become weak. Near the end of the movie, King T'Challa actually creates this new vision for his nation, saying, we are going to be true liberators. We are going to use our resources for everybody around the globe if they need it. This is actually the new vision gives us this beautiful image of a God who, we have this picture of liberating God who is a strong God who fights for us, and then a weak God who suffers with us. King T'Challa says, Wakanda will no longer watch from the shadows. Wakanda will share its resources. More connects us than separates us. In times of trouble, the wise build bridges, and the foolish build barriers. We must find a way to look after one another as if we were one single tribe. Now, in this movie, you have an entire nation come to the rescue. Unfortunately, that's not how things are for us. Unfortunately. So where are we at? Where does this land us? We as the church need to step up. We as the church have this responsibility to see the needs and to meet the needs. Like, we cannot ignore the legitimate cries of those who are being oppressed. No matter what the need is, the church is to come to the rescue. Theological shoulder shrugs, like apathy towards people, it's not just sub-Christian, but it's subhuman. The fact that if we cannot meet, as the church, people's needs, how are we truly supposed to expose who Jesus is? Saying a prayer, having the right password isn't who Jesus is. Sharing the love of Christ through action when we fulfill a need is who Jesus is. Dorothy Day actually said, if you walk past someone who's without a coat, and you have 2 coats at home, and you don't give them one of your coats, you've stolen from Jesus. What if we've lived within a framework where the way you view others is actually how you view God? The way you view others is actually how you view God. I think Dorothy Day also said, you only love God as much as the person that you love the least. What if we found a way to live within that framework? So the question is, what are the resources you have at your disposal to change and transform someone's life? How are you going to use those resources? Sure, reversing systemic racism would be fantastic, and we're going to fight for that. We are a church that's striving to be anti-racist. But what are the things, think about the things, your actions or your inactions, how you will be able to use the things that you've been given to be able to meet the needs of others. Pray with me. God, thank you so much for this movie. Thank you so much for the message that it portrays. Thank you so much for your heart in this movie and the things that it has done for culture, the things that it's done for society, the character that you have given us. Thank you so much for an awareness through this movie that we can utilize this film to see the needs of others. May we not just see it, but we act upon this. Because we've made an observation that there are others around us that are in need. So now, please, make sure that we have this obligation to fulfill those as the church. Amen.